Welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but to provide a platform to share their voice and amplify their ideas for a more accessible world. Today, I am joined by Dr. Peter McGahey. He is a teaching assistant professor at West Virginia University in the School of Sports Sciences within the College of Applied Human Science. He is the National Educator Developer for the U.S. Soccer Federation C course and the assistant coach for the U.S. Soccer Federation Power Soccer National Team. He has degrees in educational leadership, physical education and coaching, human performance, and sport and communications. He holds both a United States Soccer Federation A license as well as a youth license. McGahey served as an NCAA Division I and II women's and men's head and assistant soccer coach for over 20 years. McGahey has coached athletes all along the developmental pathway from grassroots to Olympic development programs, from college to youth to high school as well as top soccer. He developed programming at the local club, state, and national levels, and most recently served as an assistant coach with CP Soccer, a technical advisor to Down Syndrome Sports of America, and the West Virginia Soccer Association Olympic Development Program. He is a co-author of Grassroots Coaching, Using Sports Psychology and Coaching Principles Effectively. Peter, thank you for joining me today.
Brendan, I appreciate you reading all of that stuff out. I'm really humbly and very grateful for you having me on today.
Yeah, let's dive into all the various pieces of that. So I assume soccer has always been a large part of your life. Growing up, maybe what initially drew you to it?
I just think it was the joy, the thrill. It was the local sport that I could play. I could walk to the park, right? I was the product of like the traditional soccer upbringing. My dad was my first coach, who had never played soccer, who learned soccer out of a book, and sort of it was the place that I could go and play with my friends. Whenever I go back and visit my folks in Denver, and I go to the park, the very first park that I played, the fond memories of my youth playing experience in Washington Park always stick out for me.
How much do you think that informal nature of soccer and how much you enjoyed that piece influenced how you want to coach and develop programs?
Oh, I think a lot. I think that there's a level of autonomy with soccer that is unique. It's not coach driven. It is really player. It's a player driven. It's a player centric sport. I think that level of autonomy and those level of choices and that level of movement and that level of being able to be with your teammates and competing against opponents. I've actually never thought about my love of the game in how you've phrased it, of how it has led me on the path that I'm on. But I would say undoubtedly the key elements of the game and the things that I found joyful and fulfilling as a young player, I certainly try to create in the learning environments that I develop now.
Yeah, I mean, just being in the strength and conditioning space for the last 8 years, we work with a lot of athletes, and even in that small time frame, I feel like the landscape of sport has evolved so drastically to the point where the kids are specializing in sports on the earlier side, or they're playing year-round sports, and whether or not that contributes to increased rates of injuries or not is kind of up for debate, but probably has pretty solid grounds to make that statement. But how do you think soccer, like a season or a year, an annual plan for soccer should be structured for youth athletes up through collegiate athletes?
I think some of that depends. It depends on the context. I think the challenge is that the race towards early specialization where they sacrifice all of their other sports for only single sports, that is well ingrained in our culture now, in terms of just the pressure that players and families feel that somehow that they're missing out. What I would just share is I really feel like in the grassroots space, the idea that now athletes, people, human beings are able to choose and experience lots of athletic experiences, Brendan, is absolutely key. So I think it's a place of how does it have to be structured? It has to be structured and appropriate for their context, where they with their age and stage. And it has to be able to allow them to be able to sample the sport and be able to play it according to what their needs are. And that means, I think, is in the grassroots level, you should be playing soccer one season, basketball the next season, skiing another season, mountain biking in between, running around in the neighborhood, shooting hoops with your friends, playing pickleball in gym class. I think that lifting weights, as you sort of get into sort of where it becomes appropriate and safe, those things are, I think, the more we're teaching people to enjoy their athletic experiences and move in a healthy way, the more we're going to contribute to healthy and well-rounded individuals.
Yeah, I know a little bit about it from some of the motor learning research. I believe it's Brazil that plays a game called Pelada, which is soccer that is kind of completed in various ways depending on who shows up, what size of a field you have, what type of ball you have. And there's something this research shows, I guess, that all that variability, whether you have an 11-year-old playing with people much bigger than them, or you have a smaller sided game, or you have 5-on-5 versus 11-on-11, that diversity and variability and structure contributes a lot to how they develop their skills. So I know within soccer, like you have your futsals and you have different single-sided games, but maybe I guess like what I'm trying to get at is how do you think people learn sports most effectively versus like structured instruction versus, like you mentioned, some autonomy to kind of learning the skills?
Well, I think you mentioned a couple of interesting things about the importance of variability, the importance of how we're acquiring skills. One of the things I think is that within the research is that what has been taught for any number of years is this concept of skill acquisition. That somehow before players play sports, that now they have to acquire these skills, and somehow that we have a list that now they have to go through and we have to acquire all these skills, and then we can put them into a game and they can experience the game. The analogy that I would use with this is I don't buy that approach. I believe in sort of where the modern literature is moving towards is this idea about skill adaptation, that really it's about the person who's playing the sport's ability to adapt their skill set to be able to play the game. And this concept that you mentioned about variability is really true. The idea is like you never step in a river twice, right? If you're hiking. The idea is in soccer, you've probably never really made the same pass twice because the circumstances, the defender, the distance, the grass, the wind, your feelings on that day are all a little bit different. So it really comes back to this idea is that do we believe that sports skills are these rigid things that we have to teach and pour into people, or is it a place where we're recognizing and we can celebrate that lots of people can play, lots of people can do lots of different things, and it's our responsibility as coaches to create environments where they can adapt, learn, and grow their skill set to be able to meet the needs of their game. It's the analogy that I would give you is when kids go and play, they don't talk about, hey, let's do some drills. Let's pause. Hey, we got all our buddies together. We're out playing. Hey, we need to do drills before we can play the game. No, they run out and they get games started and they play and they adapt them along the way. Rules, field size, number of players, because they want to have a joyful playing experience. And I think sometimes that we need to recognize that. It's the analogy that people say, well, when do we teach stretching for young kids? I say we can teach it in a variety of places, but you also don't see very many kids bust out their front door to go play with their friends. And as they're running down the street, they say, stop. Oh, hold on. I got to stretch out my hamstring. So I think we need to celebrate and meet them where they're at and create environments that allow them to adapt and enjoy their sports experience.
So how do you find that balance, I guess, between like rote repetition of specific skills, whether it's passing or other aspects of soccer, and the free play? Like, how can you provide structure to a session while also allowing for some variability and, I guess, unstructured play?
I think you can. Again, depending upon what term you want. I would use the term. You can change the variables of planning. You could talk about the constraints that you put on practice. They're games that are really wonderful for players to play that can be modified and adapted and adjusted, as opposed to them standing in one line and them dribbling through cones, for an example. And the idea now is allowing that free choice. So in a real overly simple example, so I could play a game with a group of players That's a small-sided game, and has all the elements of the game, and I can hope dribbling emerges. Or I can go the other way and I can design an activity where everybody stands in a line. You have a lineup of cones, and the players weave and zigzag in and out of those. When they ever actually use those pre-programmed rote dribbling skills in a game, that would be open for debate. I just don't see that they exist. The happy medium in between is that now I can design games and activities by changing the variables and now allow the players to experience the game in their own way. So for example, is I could take that same activity now, and instead of having the cones in a straight line, I could spread the cones out all over the field. And I could ask the players to dribble in and out of the cones as they see fit. Well, that could be inclusive for players who could be in a wheelchair, that players who have various physical impairments, etc. That could be open for some. You could use different color cones, different areas for individuals with intellectual difference. So you can meet a lot of people where they are by doing those things. And then the reality is then that player, or that child in that case, is actually choosing where to dribble on their own. They're moving from this gate to that gate to this gate to that gate. They're going back to that same gate, which is much more about the autonomous decision making that would happen in the game. So all of that, I think, there's lots of ways that we can sort of rewind the fun games that we know that we can play, and we can make it adaptive to the sport environment.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe we'll transition to kind of how to adapt a practice or a skill session for a variety of abilities. And I mean, one of the first things that came to mind with like free play or with gameplay is athletes of lesser ability, of less skill, are going to be left behind. And I wonder how to create an environment where they feel encouraged to continue working on their skills when they're maybe not necessarily being rewarded with the external validation of scoring goals or having success. So how can you cater a practice to a wide range of abilities?
I think this is a real challenge that we all face. And I think this is a place where we have to try to do our best to make our environments as supportive as possible. I'll give you two ways. One, it's the place that I think it's where we have to find meaningful playing experiences for players of varieties, abilities when we talk about putting them in a full game setting. Meaning those players should get equal playing time. Those players should play in critical positions. Those players should be able to have important roles. And the game should not be only about winning and losing at the grassroots level. It should be inclusive about the experience, about playing, having many. Somebody says this once, this quote I like to share is, as many as possible, as long as possible, in the best environment possible. So we need to keep the kids playing. So we need to have environments that now the recognition is it's not the trophy that sits on my desk and collects dust. It's the idea that that player comes back for the next 5 or 6 years of continuous sport and then changes to something else, and then potentially becomes a lifelong sports enthusiast and participant in a variety of things that we should be judging our success on. So it's shifting our focus away from sort of immediate results where the best players play, the weakest players sit. Nope, we need to create inclusive environments in those game day environments, and how we view mistakes and how we view winning as coaches is really important for us to be able to create safe and healthy competitive environments for our athletes of variety of abilities. Now, what happens during the week? What happens during the week is the reality is we all have teams that have varying ability levels, some over here, whatever way you want to share that. We can create games that absolutely reward the players with the ability, with the most ability, and exclude players super fast. But we need to create environments where some of those players are able to work on their skills in different ways. So let me give you an example. I'm sure you've all heard, your listeners and you are familiar with the idea about like the King of the Hill game, where you could play it in basketball, you could play it in soccer, but soccer will be my example. If we give all of the players a soccer ball and we put them in a space and we say, okay, here's how we're going to play. The last person who's in the space after all of the balls have been kicked out, you're the winner. So the players go on and play. The players who get kicked out first are who? The players who are the least skills, the least athletic, the least development kids, that they get kicked out. And if I have the game set up in that way, they are excluded. They're standing on the sidelines and they're waiting. while the best players have a steadily increasing challenge. Well, I think it's important for us to recognize that now is we can design that environment where it feels inclusive and supportive for everybody. So the player who needs a different challenge and the player who needs more challenge. So let me re-explain the rules of the game. So we're going to have all of the players inside the space. All of them are going to have soccer balls, and the rules are the same. If you kick, the last person in the space with their ball is the winner. However, if your ball gets kicked out, you grab a jersey from over here, you go back into the space, and you continue to kick other people's balls out even though you don't have your ball anymore. So Brendan, what this does is it allows the player who gets eliminated quickly to continue to participate in the game all the way until the end. They get to run, they get to jump, they get to fall down, they get to make decisions, they get to defend, they get to do those things so that they're continuing to participate in a meaningful way. And for the player who needed a different challenge, the player who might be a little bit ahead of the other players right now, think about what happens for that player. Well, all of these other players' balls are now kicked out, and now their challenge, as more players are being reintegrated into the game, their challenge is actually going up too. So now you're having the player who has the highest, you're serving all of the players on your, let's call it skill continuum or talent continuum within your team, and it creates a much more enjoyable environment for those things. So the player who needs needs more inclusion is being included. The player who needs more challenge is being challenged. And I think we have a real responsibility as coaches to find creative, adaptive solutions to modify our games and learning environments to make them as inclusive as possible for all of the players.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, because the complaint is that if you cater to the lower end of that skill continuum, that the higher end won't get challenged, in the same way that education wise, if you have a inclusive classroom, then the teacher might have to spend more resources, more time helping the students who need a little more support, and then the ones on the higher end of the spectrum aren't challenged enough. So just finding, whether it's a school lesson, a curriculum, or whether it's a sport practice, finding ways to challenge both ends of that skill continuum is essential. And you mentioned multiple meaningful participation, which is a key component of universal design for learning. So I wonder if there's aspects of universal design that you incorporate within your coaching. So like multiple means of representation and engagement and action and expression.
Again, I think it's a place where, again, universal design more of an umbrella than in terms of meaningful experiences for me is a really important one, because again, it's a place of where the players have to have meaningful and authentic experiences. And I think sometimes, particularly when we get into the adaptive space, that we're just creating, we feel like we're doing enough by just having like, hey, this is great, we're here. No, we have to have meaningful opportunities and designing activities so that everybody can be included regardless of where they are. And I really like your term on the skill continuum, right? On how they're going to be able to participate. So meaningful and authentic experiences really matter for me. Meaningful and authentic experiences means they have to succeed, they have to fail, they have to have a little bit of struggle, they have to have challenge, they have to have success. They have to be able to now experience the game in a really authentic way and be able to express themselves while they're playing. And I think that's a place of where if you have fun and enjoyable environments for players, you're going to now be able to create those opportunities for them to express themselves and have meaningful experiences. So I get asked a lot, like, how do you coach within the adaptive pathway and the disability pathway? And my pause is, Brendan, that's a really challenging question for me, is because I'm always challenged to meet the needs of the athletes who are in front of me. So I'll tell a story about that. So I was working with a group of athletes several years ago at CP Soccer overnight camp. And we had a group from Ireland that had brought their CP Ireland over. Wonderful people doing tremendous things. And I was doing an activity with the players where we were sort of, again, we were walking in a certain way, we were moving our feet, we were doing duck walks and pigeons and birds and flicking and doing all of those things. And I recall the conversation very vividly. And that was the age and the stage of the players. They were younger players. Let's call them like somewhere between like 7 years old and 9 years old, or 6 and 8, maybe in terms of that range. And we were doing that, and I got done with practice, and it was fun and it was great. But somebody asked me a question, like they asked, "Did you do that activity because they had CP?" And I thought, no, it had nothing to do with that. Those movement activities were what I would have done with children in a variety of spaces, because that's where the age and stage they are. That was what fit with what they needed to do that day. So my activities were designed universally to now capture lots of different players. And just by like, but they're like, but those activities are really important for athletes with CP. That's a good reminder. Those activities were really important for athletes with CP. And the reminder for me is those were really important for children of a variety of in that age and stage, because it was something that they found joyful experience and they were learning to move their bodies. Period. End of story. And I think those are the places, as we look at universal design and say, wait a second, if we actually capture and look at our learning, and we capture on this side one group of players, and on the other side the people who are typically left out, we actually capture everyone at the same time. Instead of narrowing our focus, we can actually say, hey, if we make these things more inclusive, more supportive, more based on the needs of the athletes and who are in front of us, we're going to be able to capture the needs of many more people and many more athletes.
Yeah, that's one of the main things that I try to communicate to fitness professionals, is that there are a lot more similarities and there are differences when working with people with and without disabilities. And like you said, like those weren't CP specific exercises. Those were good movement options for people of that age, and they just so happen to have CP. So it's like you can understand the diagnosis, you can understand all the nuances of the anatomy of CP, but at the end of the day, you're training the individual in front of you. They're not a diagnosis. They're an individual with a specific set of skills. And as a coach, it's your responsibility to kind of figure out what those are, what they can do, what they can't do. Maybe they need more support in some regards, but they're able to participate with their peers and others. So just, I guess, not limiting or not putting self-limiting beliefs on people just because they have a disability is something I think I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, and I would share, I think that too. The question is what do you see first for me? Well, I see the athlete who's in front of me. What are their needs? How do we co-create, me as the coach and then the player co-creating it together, the best learning environment for them to learn and to grow in? How are you meeting their needs? So it's a place where, again, that I think is that as you venture into this space, and I'm asked that question a lot, like, how do you change your process? Well, if you focus on the athletes first and you're creating athlete-centered learning environments, and you're now adapting based on the needs of the players who are in front of you, your ability to design, capture meaningful experiences for the athletes become much greater than if you're saying these people this athlete has this, they can't do this. Well, I think it's also, do you believe that they can do it? And if they can do it, now we've got to find something that they can be successful at and struggle, and where they can grow. That's also, I think, a critical component of what we're saying is that now within meaningful experiences is that they have to be able to play the game. And I think that that's a beautiful part of soccer is that everybody can play. It's really the game for all people. But now what does that look like?
Yeah, and you see that we use.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and you've really showcased that through also your participation with power soccer and stuff. I mean, there's different ways that people complete the tasks, but there's always ways to include.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because again, it's a place of where this goes back to your concept of skill acquisition. Actually, what we were talking about before, is it the completion of the task, or is it the execution of the skill? For me, it's the completion of the task, which now has lots of variability for the individual to complete the task lots of different ways, instead of now saying you must do it this way. The moment we start to say you must do things this way, you have to do it in this manner, in this construct, we are now eliminating, we are becoming now exclusive. Are there movement patterns that are going to be more effective than others? Okay, fine. That's not my area of expertise, and I'm not going to get into like undoubtedly answer is yes, there's going to be a level of efficiency, but not everybody has the opportunity to be as efficient as others, but everybody has the opportunity to complete the task. And if we focus on now, hey, let's get the task completed to the best of your ability, I think we are making sport a far more welcoming place for our athletes, and for both for athletes, for coaches, for parents, for fans, because there's lots of different ways to complete the task.
Yeah, it confirms the research. I think it's called Bernstein's hammer. Skilled blacksmith complete the same task in a variety of different ways. They attached some cyclography to the blacksmith's hammer and noticed that every time he hit the same spot on the anvil, but he accomplished it in a variety of different ways. The hammer was swung at a slightly different trajectories, at slightly different angles, but at the end of the day, it's just about how you finish the task in front of you, how you complete the task at hand. So once you move away from this idea that things have to look a uniform way or there's one universal technique that all people have to adhere to, and you just appreciate that everyone's going to complete whether it's sport or exercise in a slightly different way, I guess it might lower your fear that people with disabilities move differently or that they function differently. When you look at those differences in function as just an individual characteristic and not a deficit, then you can begin to find ways to include people with disabilities in a variety of environments. We are grateful for the support of our first show sponsor. Resolution Fitness offers leading brand health club equipment and accessories for residential and commercial use. In addition to traditional exercise equipment, they specialize in adaptive fitness products and wheelchair accessible machines. If you're interested in outfitting your fitness facility or home gym to be more accessible, visit www.resolutionfitness.ca or the link in the show notes below.
Yeah, I think that the piece is the idea about deficit thinking is really one of the things that's really important as we talk about the learning environments that we're going to create. Are we designing learning environments that meet the players where they are with where they're at, and now creating authentic experiences for them to play the game and experience the game? Really important. And that deficit thinking is just because they can't do that doesn't mean they can do all of these other things and be able to play the game in a really exciting way. And again, I would say humbly and graciously, our athletes on the Power Soccer national team remind me of that on a regular basis, because they're playing the beautiful game in a different way. And it is just as beautiful, just as passionate, just as competitive, just as high level as any other athletes that I've ever been fortunate enough to coach. And it's amazing. And they just do it a little bit differently.
Yeah, just for the sake of differentiation and clarification, I guess we can use like adaptive populations to differentiate between those athletes with and without disabilities. But what do you think makes an effective coach for adaptive populations?
Openness, patience, excitement, creativity. I might say is what makes a coach open for any population, right? For anyone, they have to be open to and excited about the game that they're going to be teaching. They have to be humble enough that now they're going to be able to say, hey, you're going to be able to solve this a lot of different ways. When you're working in with adaptive athletes, the idea is that you're going to have to be patient, because sometimes it's going to take longer. Sometimes the task is going to be completed differently. And again, I think it's the removing of our mental models of like it has to be done this way that becomes really important. And then you have to, I think, create opportunities where, as the coach in the adaptive space, how you create real, authentic connection and rapport with your athletes is really important. Because the concept when you're talking about coaching, you're helping design learning environments, but you're also helping individuals change and grow, moving from where they are to where they would like to be at some point in the future, that you would want them to improve, right? So the question now is that where they are and where they're going to be in the future, there's a gap, right? This performance gap. The idea is that if you look at the performance gap as a deficiency, trouble. Because now all of a sudden it's about what they cannot do. If you just reality and we just celebrate, the idea is that where they are and where they're going to be are two different places, and we recognize that the joy of coaching happens in the gap. How we change, how we build competencies, how we build skills, how we help with knowledge. we get to function in the gap. It's the most beautiful place to be. But it also, in the adaptive space, becomes really important that we have really positive relationships with our athletes, because in order to change, we're going to need, as human beings, support and challenge. Meaning that if we give too much support and not enough challenge, people get bored. People don't like it. If it's too challenging with not enough support, people will get discouraged and then will choose to do other things. So balancing and understanding that the continuum of your behavior in terms of challenging and supporting behavior and having real positive and authentic relationships with your athletes is important in any context, and in the adaptive context, I think it is paramount.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk in the fitness space how we advocate for more of a qualitative than a quantitative assessment. I mean, there's a lot of movement screens and protocols that fitness professionals might do to identify some of those supposed deficits, and but I'm not sure they're always particularly necessary. How do you assess or monitor progress with your athletes?
I think that's always a challenge in terms of how do we assess and how do we see them growing. I think it's a place of where in the soccer space there's always this place about where, or this in any athletics place, there's always, I think, this feeling of test, assess, reassess. Like we're becoming a super data driven world, right? Like, and there's no way around that. I think that some of the challenge, I think, is with sports like soccer is we can break these things down and we can track data and we can track things that we can observe. That's what I think is that how do I my default is, are the players getting better at playing the game, not necessarily getting better at the skills testing. So I think it's a place where we have to be careful of not teaching to the test in terms of the old educational adage of like, hey, we're gonna test you in this way and your passing is going to improve. Well, guess what? The reality is if I train them to the test, I can improve their skill execution. Whereas, but then when you put them into the game and it all of a sudden goes chaotic and those things, they still can't perform because the techniques don't it doesn't have transferability. So for me, as it relates to soccer, this idea and my general feeling overall is we need to be making more of the transfer into sport, and then being able to now within the sports environment be able to talk about what are we actually seeing the players do, meaning observable behavior. Some of the things I think that we get into a lot of is with the with lots of athletes of I think they're getting better or they're good. And we make these generalizations without really data points. Are they, again, as it relates to playing the game, are they passing more? Are they receiving more? Are they executing the skills and playing the game at a more proficient level? I think that we can create data points to do those things. It's just a little bit more challenging in team sports to be totally data driven, as opposed to now, hey, the struggle they're learning this season could be going not so great, but then they're going to take a dip and now they're going to make real progress in the next season. So I know that that's a long-winded answer to say is I don't really have a good way to measure that necessarily, because I think in soccer it's the beauty of the game is how you're playing the game becomes the most important.
I wonder if an over reliance on data or the need to quantify anything just has negative repercussions in the same way that it was intended to have positive ones.
I think sometimes I have a general feeling is sometimes this is like we're not asking with assessment is we love scales, right? We love scales, but we're super hard. Like if you ask me, hey, how am I doing on this podcast on a scale of 1 to 5? Somebody's get, oh, 5. Well, maybe I'm a 3 today, right? Maybe I'm, so I think sometimes the challenge with the over reliance on data is sometimes it's a place of where our bias, our discomfort with giving hard feedback with challenging athletes, right, is sometimes leads us to just give wishy-washy, non-meaningful feedback that's not really helpful or designed to now actually help the athlete improve. This is where I go back to now. I think it's a place where I think I used the term before. I think these things are about co-constructed. I think it's a place where now is if you create environments where assessments are co-constructed between coach and athlete, even if you ask, what do you want to get better at this season? I can ask that to any athlete at basically any level. And now that athlete now can say, I think I want to get better at my shooting or my dribbling. Okay, how might we measure that at the end of the season? And now you create this opportunity where now it's both an external assessment and a self-assessment, and now we're working together to help them bridge their developmental gaps in their growth. Those types of goal setting, those types of conversations, I think, become much richer for the athletes because now they're really in charge of that. Oh, it's much different if the coach tells me I need to work on my shooting than if I've chosen to work on my shooting and the coach is going to support and challenge me in my shooting.
Yeah. And the athlete's probably a lot more likely to adhere and put in a good effort if they also believe that that's a limiting skill for them or that it's something that they want to improve on. I like that co-construct idea. It has a lot of parallels to how when we're creating inclusive programs, we want to kind of co-design or collaborate with the individual and not just project our biases and our preferences onto them, but account for the information and the things that they want to work on and the experiences that they've had. I mean, we can try to be as proactive as possible when creating an accessible environment, but at the end of the day, our current and future clients are going to dictate what's accessible for them and what's inclusive for them. We don't get to decide that for them. So just being receptive. I mean, the first thing you said was openness as one of the key characteristics for an effective adaptive populations coach or trainer. And I think that humbleness, that openness is essential in all domains.
You in your introduction, I was drawn to the comment of when you said we don't speak for the athletes. We don't. Like, I think that's a place of where we...
Yeah, that's one of the things that's...
I just think it's really powerful.
Yeah, that's always been, I guess, a challenge it's a challenge as an advocate that doesn't currently have a disability to kind of be on their side and to be advocating for them, but not speaking for them and them just as a vague term as encompassing people with disabilities. But just doing my best to learn. That's why this podcast has been so beneficial, both for me and hopefully the people that listen to it, as it's really just me learning in public and having the opportunity to learn from a lot of really amazing people. So you've coached at the collegiate level.
Yes.
Yeah. You've coached at the collegiate level as well as within these subsets, whether it's adaptive populations, youth sports, etc. What has been the most rewarding experience? And you don't have to answer it as anticipating that I'm expecting you to say something with like the CP soccer, power soccer, but like what experiences kind of stand out within your career in coaching soccer?
Good fortune has provided me lots of opportunity, right? Lots of opportunity to work with lots of people. I think in a really powerful way it's seeing two things that, and I could share stories about where this is in terms of within sort of what is called the mainstream pathway. You could also I could talk about now is where it's working with athletes in the adaptive pathway. What stands out for me is that the thrills are always where you see people understand and you see their own self-belief grow, where they now have grown and changed with something that they have wanted to change, and they're doing something or playing differently because of the circumstances and learning as a human being. I could stand on the sideline of feelings of contentment and joy to see the thrill on lots of athletes' faces as they've experienced the game and recognizing that they're growing and changing through it. The other part that I think is the place that has been transformative for me is how the game connects people, how it connects people to recognizing who they are recognizing what their potential could be and inspiring those types of relationships, but really in essence of creating an awesome sense of belonging. Like you belong to this group of people, and being an athlete is okay. And that's on a variety of levels. But I think it's a place where that universality of sport is, it creates a sense of belonging for people when it's done right. Those are undoubtedly the stories of the human beings, the connections, their belongings, and how they've grown as people. I have been incredibly blessed.
Yeah, that sense of belonging is actually a really nice way to define inclusion, more so than seemingly the presence and absence or presence of people with and without disabilities together. It's what environment and what people you feel the best sense of belonging among. So, not creating environments just to force people with disabilities to participate for the sake of being inclusive, but really being reflective of the environment and the instruction that you provide, and how it kind of fosters that sense of belonging. So I like that idea a lot.
It's already something that you need. You just need to ask. And a neighborhood, if you have a neighborhood that creates a sense of belonging, if you have a need, we're going to be able to try to do that because we want you to feel like you belong to this neighborhood and to this community of people as much as possible. That I think is really important, because again, the more people feel like that they belong, the more people feel like that their needs are being met, the more that they're going to want to participate in those spaces. It also talks about, with the code of the neighbor, the idea that do we take a longer term view of things, meaning neighbors around the neighborhood. I live around because he grew up here. He's been here for like 40 years. He looks at the neighborhood in a way of not like 4 minutes or 4 days. He looks at it with 40-year eyes. That now is that now the people in their lives that are going to be transformed are going to be long-standing and are going to have a transformative effect in terms of our life. And I think that's a place where, as coaches in the fitness industry, in soccer, in sport in general, the more we recognize that if we say, hey, if you have a need, we want you to belong and we're going to help you meet it. And we're going to look at your growth and you as part of this community for a much longer period of time. Brendan, I think then we're going to start to put less stress on one day or one challenge or one set of circumstances and say, wow, we want this human being to be able to be fulfilled, content, growing for a lifetime, for a long time. And I think that that's a place that then we start to create really welcoming and creative and exciting learning environments for athletes and human beings. I'm always waiting for the and. What I'm inspired by is like your story. I worked in this environment, I got in this environment, and now all of a sudden I recognized that there was a need, and this was a group of athletes and human beings that needed more people to be inspired to take action in it. What I would really be encouraging people is that if you're inspired to work in this space with athletes in the adaptive space of varieties of ability levels, that you seek out opportunities to get involved in your local levels. There are local levels all across. If you're interested in power soccer, the power of the internet now is so much better than when it used to be, when you had to have a phone book and you couldn't find anybody's phone number in anything. If you have a passion for getting in this, get involved and serve in your local community. And then the opportunity, I think can grow from there. If you're looking for my book, or it's actually our book, Good Fortune is the book of grassroots coaching is written with me and my mentor. My mentor now happens to be 98 years old. We wrote it 4 years ago, so he was 94. So the perspective that a coach who you have a coach who wrote a book, we wrote the book sort of in and around COVID. But is the perspective that he has as a human being who I share with people is he was in World War II, just from a historical standpoint that seems so very far away, but it provides perspective in terms of some of these long-standing psychological principles and using them effectively to make our learning environments as welcoming as possible. You can absolutely order that online. If you wanted to reach out to me, I'm happy to have you order that as well. But I think at the end of the day, what I would love to see is more people saying, hey, this is a great space to be in, and hey, I'd love to join. How can you help me get involved? I'm happy if people reach out to me and in the show notes, etc., through email, and I can help them get connected with lots of other people who can they can help serve in their communities and serve all these athletes of all these wondering ability levels.
Yeah, we'll definitely include social media handles, websites, book in the show notes for people to easily get to. I just want to expand on like kind of one thing you said there. That praise of working with people with disabilities has always felt incredibly uncomfortable to me. It kind of implies that people with disabilities don't deserve respect from everyone and that I possess some sort of unique set of characteristics to support people with disabilities. And I had no unique characteristics or knowledge of disability when I first started. But like you said, you just have to get started. You just have to get involved. I had no previous experience of disability, no one in my immediate family. My mom made me volunteer at Special Olympics one day, and I immediately was drawn to it. So I guess you just never know where that experience will take you or kind of how it will influence you. So the more programs like Top Soccer, CP Soccer that exist in these communities, the more opportunities people like myself will have to kind of have a life-changing experience. So if you want to start a program but you aren't sure where to begin, Peter would probably be an amazing resource to do so. But I also would encourage you to kind of take that on, even if you don't feel like you're necessarily prepared, to kind of seek out the necessary resources to be more prepared. But at the end of the day, not assume that, oh, I have to possess X amount of experience or I have to possess this knowledge related to disability before I get involved. If you have great intentions and the will to support people with disabilities, then I highly encourage you to get involved in whether it's sport, music, any type of domain. I think that's one thing that I've found to be really important that I want to communicate. So,
Brendan, I would say is the fear of getting started keeps a lot of people out. Get involved. Run right into the space. There are few places that are as enriching and as rewarding, for sure. And I would share and I would echo your uncomfortableness. I feel the same way about somehow that I have some kind of special powers. No, I'm just really passionate about being able to create sport and having it be as inclusive and as open for as many people as possible. And this just happens to be where I am finding now my most level of passion and contentment and fulfillment with this and we need more people to join us in this journey for sure, because the individuals and athletes are deserving of the very best. So I'm happy to help anybody I can.
Peter, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the AdaptX podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.